Hey everybody, Dr. Phil here. This is going to be a video discussing stress in the context of organizational behavior. So let's go ahead and jump right in. So let's talk about what stress is. I mean, something that we all feel, right? Um, Stress is defined more broadly and again more academically as a psychological response to demands that possess certain stakes for the person and that tax or exceed the person's capacity or resources. So then a couple of, pretty logical and corollary questions would be, do you want a stress-free job? Again, this is a great time to maybe pause the video for a few minutes and spend a few moments in self-reflection. Do you want a stress-free job? Which jobs are more and less stressful? So I think we would probably say things like medical jobs, for example, law jobs. Certainly medical would be very stressful. Um, and do you want a stress-free job? The obvious answer might sound like yes, but not necessarily because a little bit of stress is generally is good for us. It's a good thing. Just not too much. I think if you had a completely stress-free job, and this is just really my opinion speaking, I think you would find that quickly to be kind of boring. All right. So why are some employees more quote unquote stressed than others? So to understand what it means to feel stressed, it's helpful to consider the transactional theory of stress. So this theory explains how stresses are perceived and appraised, as well as how people respond. And again, there's a huge variety in what people perceive their stresses are, how they appraise those stresses, how they deal with those stresses, so on and so forth. So here we see the transactional theory of stress. So we basically have broken it into four quadrants. So we've got stressors along the top, like hindrance, challenge, and then on the left, kind of y-axis, if you will, work and non-work. So for work, that might be a hindrance, role conflicts, role ambiguities, role overloads, daily hassles. Again, all things we deal with at work. Challenges could be time pressures. That's very common. Work complexity. The more complex, the more stressful. And also work responsibility. Feeling that responsibility can also be very stressful. And as it pertains to non-work, as it relates to non-work, work-family conflicts could involve, could affect that. Negative life events, financial uncertainty, and some challenges could be family time demands. Trying to get that infamous and sometimes, um, sometimes it's hard to do this, but that whole, work-life balance, personal developments, and also positive life events. So some hindrance stresses, as we said, could be role conflicts, at work. That can be sometimes problematic. Role ambiguity, what exactly am I supposed to be doing? That's why a lot of jobs or a lot of companies have a job description. Role overload, there's just too much to do, and I'm just one person, I can't do all this, or we're just one team. And also all the daily hassles. A lot of managers will tell you that they spend a lot of their day just putting out fires and dealing with employees before they could even think about getting their own job done. And some challenge stresses, right? Things like time pressure. That's becoming increasingly common. Work complexity. Again, the more complex that work is, the more stressful it's going to tend to be. Not always, but most times. And then work responsibility. The more responsibility you feel, the more stressful it may be for you. And hindrance stresses, things like work family conflict, right? Trying to get that evasive kind of work-life balance can be very difficult. Negative life events, obviously life is going on while you're working. And a big thing, certainly becoming a big thing now is financial uncertainty, right? A lot of people live in paycheck to paycheck, not having really any money saved. Poor financial literacy habits are often keeping people in these situations. And challenge stresses, time demands from family. You work too much. You need to spend more time with us. Personal development. What are you? And that could be in and outside of work, of course. Um, and also positive life events. Those can be good as well, but they can still be distracting from your job at hand. So how do people cope with stresses? Coping refers to the behaviors and thoughts people use to manage stressful demands and the emotions associated with those demands. And there's, different methods of coping, behavioral versus cognitive. Some people are much more maybe emotional. Some people are just more calm. They're more trying to think these things through. And the focus of coping, right? Problem solving versus regulation of emotions. Your time, your energy, labor is much better spent trying to solve the issues that are stressing you out, than just using all that energy just to be emotional and be upset. Completely understandable. But if you spend all your time being like that, then you may not actually solve the problem, and it just continues, it just perpetuates. So here we see examples of coping strategies, right? So we have behavioral methods versus cognitive, right? So if it's problem focused for behavioral methods, things like working harder, seeking assistance, acquiring additional resources, versus emotion focused, which could be engaging in alternative activities, maybe just trying not to worry about it or try not to think about it, seeking support or venting anger. They're quite common too. And then cognitive methods, right? If it's problem focused, we're thinking about strategizing, we're thinking about self-motivating, or changing priorities, excuse me, versus emotion focused, which could be avoiding, distancing, and ignoring, maybe looking for the positive in the negative, which is often a good thing, and then sometimes reappraising. So here we see some examples of strain, right? So stress can cause physiological strains, things like high blood pressure, back pain, stomach aches, right? Psychological strains, depression, anxiety, forgetfulness, inability to think clearly. Burnout is behavioral strains, right? Alcohol and drug use, teeth grinding, maybe compulsive behaviors, eating too much. So again, we see that, stress is and the effects of stress can be very pervasive. But how important is stress? Stresses and the stress process influence strains and ultimately people's health and well-being. Stresses also have an impact on job performance and organizational commitments. All right, thanks for watching this brief video, and I'll see you all in a future video. Take care.